It's not a lie, if you believe it. I lie every second of the day. My whole life is a sham.
In the towering city of New York, Frank and Estelle Costanza conceived a son. A boy they could funnel all their neurotic values into. A boy who, unbeknownst to them, would grow up to be one of the most insecure, selfish, and manipulative men stalking the streets of New York. While George Costanza does have the appropriate degree of cunning and lack of morality to be a manipulative mastermind, he suffers from such a tragically mediocre IQ, need for validation, and instinctive laziness that almost all the psychological strategies he implements end up backfiring. So although his ideas do have the potential to do real harm, most of his victims manage to escape his narcissistic grip unscathed, making George more like an irritating fly buzzing around than any calculated genius who's always 2 steps ahead. But despite the poor outcome in almost all of his schemes, George never stops constructing deceptions that might, just might, end up benefiting him. So let's take a deeper look at how George Costanza at least tried to manipulate everyone in Seinfeld. Before we start, we need to understand the psychology of the character. George views the world as a completely unfair place, where people are forced to play the hand they're dealt. And although there are others suffering in much worse positions than his own, George has no care or consideration for any of them. He's just laser focused on his own insecurities. Why was I born short? Why did I go bald? Why did I have to have my parents? Why don't I have more money? Why is my life so hard? He's so obsessed with his own shortcomings to the point he has no appreciation for any of the benefits or gifts he was born with, and instead feels as if everyone is out to get him.
I'm about to become the target of a systematic process of intimidation and manipulation.
This allows George to cast himself as the ultimate victim, which morally justifies him taking retribution on the world, as in his mind he's not doing anything wrong, he's just leveling the playing field. But George's self-esteem is entirely attached to other people's perception of him, giving him a love-hate relationship with whoever he's trying to manipulate. On the one hand, he needs their validation, craves it, and on the other hand, he despises them for withholding it. Why do you get to reject me? Why do you get to say I'm not good enough? This insecurity makes him treat any individual that has power over him like a bank he has to break into. And there are only really 2 key things that George values: money and sex, making most of his deceptions take place at work or while dating. In the domain of dating, George is happy to live a lie if the truth won't serve him. When he's broke, unemployed, and living with his parents, he pretends to be a stockbroker to an attractive woman on the subway, as her behavior clearly indicates that she only dates successful guys. When a woman in an antique store mistakenly calls him and Jerry cool guys, he tells her he's actually an antiques collector, and pretends to own his parents' home and invites her over, where he continues the charade despite only having prune juice in the fridge to serve her. Later, when he has a job, upon hearing Elaine's co-worker falsely believes he's a bad boy, he instantly assumes that role. As if that's her fantasy, then who cares if it's real? Why shouldn't he get to pretend it's true? The same happens when a tour guide perceives him to be a tourist. If she happens to be more attracted to an out-of-towner who's only here temporarily, then what difference does it make if he's lying? The superficial details are the same. He looks like him, and they'll realistically only date for a little while anyway. After Susan dies, he takes a photograph of a gorgeous woman Jerry is dating and pretends that she was his dead fiancée, so that other beautiful women will feel as if, well, if he was good enough for her, then he's good enough for me. In each of these cases, George is using the superficial values of his targets against them. To him, if you'd only date me under these specific circumstances, then that's unfair, as I wasn't born with the right attributes to ever be any of those things. I don't deserve to just be rejected offhand. Not again. Not every time. So if he can only get into the club with a fake ID, then he'll use the fake ID. You have to remember that George mostly only dates women for their looks. So if you were physically willing to date him if he just had a different backstory, then in his mind you're basically just willing to date him, and he can tell you whatever words you need to hear to justify it. In a different world, where short, bald, broke, neurotic men were the most attractive breed, then these women would be lying for the chance to be with him. So they can hardly blame him for doing the same, just because in this reality they happen to have the upper hand. They should be flattered. He would be. George views dating as a game that everyone is playing, trying to hide their least attractive qualities and exaggerate their most appealing features. So he employs lots of little psychological strategies to fool people into viewing him differently. On the more innocent end, he likes to chew or eat something when asking a woman out over the phone, as that way he'll sound more at ease and casual, as he believes that once a woman detects you care too much or are vulnerable to her rejection, then she's more likely to pull that trigger. A woman not liking George isn't a turnoff, it's a default setting. So even when a date goes badly and she clearly doesn't want to see him again, he'll leave something behind at her apartment so that she has to meet him again to give it back, as he thinks that it takes a bit more time for his personality to catch on, like an annoying jingle. So he just needs to drag it out, and then maybe she might just get used to him being around. One of George's more pathetic manipulative tactics to avoid being dumped is to simply avoid her. His plan is to show her off at a work ball, but if she can't see or speak to him before the event, then she'll still be socially obligated to show up and only break things off afterwards. So once she says, "We need to talk," he shoots for the door, then screens her calls with an annoyingly long answering machine message so that she's disincentivized from even waiting long enough to leave a message. Then if she does leave a message to say, "I'm at the office, call me back," he'll call her house to leave a warm message on her machine as if all is fine, and reminding her that he'll see her at the ball. Slyly finding a way to drag this reluctant date kicking and screaming to his work event so he can have just one moment in front of the whole office looking like a stud. What's truly tragic is that George only really values the women that don't want him, as he has so much self-loathing that almost anyone who would settle for him doesn't seem good enough. For example, when the woman he's dating has a male roommate who looks just like him, he manipulates her into making him move out by highlighting how unnatural it is. But now once he's gone and the threat is resolved, he's left with nothing but the unappealing pressure of the commitment. When he feared rejection, he would do anything to have her, but now once he's accepted, she's worthless to him. The same situation plays out with his fiancée Susan. He had to convince her into marrying him, and then once she accepts his proposal, he instantly feels trapped and like he made a mistake. Then rather than just being honest with her, he does everything possible to try to make her break up with him. He breaks down in tears in front of her so she'll agree to postpone the wedding, he pretends to smoke to turn her off, and he asks her to sign a prenup, even though she has more money than him. When none of that works, he even tries to cheat on her by secretly meeting up with Hollywood actress Marissa Tomei, as hearing that she goes for quirky short bald men like him is too good an opportunity to pass up. To pull this off without getting caught, George dedicates a significant amount of time to developing a thorough alibi. As if he wants to say he was with Elaine while emotionally cheating with Marissa, they need to create a compelling story as to why they were even meeting up and what they discussed. That way they're in sync if Susan asks, which shows strategic foresight. But at no point does George ever really factor Susan's feelings into this. She's just his obligation, a burden, a mere obstacle in the way of his desires. If he gets the chance to ditch her for someone better, then by God he'd take it. But he selfishly doesn't want her to find out for two reasons. Firstly, and selfishly, if he fails, he still wants her as a backup, but knows she won't stay with him if she finds out that he perceives her as a backup. And secondly, because he doesn't want to be the known cause of breaking off the engagement, as not only would he have to deal with Susan and her family's anger and disappointment, but what would people say?
I can't face that scene! Do you know what kind of a scene that would be? I'd rather be unhappy for the rest of my life than going through something like that!
This is because George desperately cares what other people think about him. His reputation always comes first. This is why he lies to people that he got 1409 in his SATs, and this is why he needs to fool the woman he's dating into thinking he's got a higher IQ than he really does. So George constructs an elaborate scheme to lock the bedroom door of the room he's taking the test in, hand the test out the window to Elaine, and then pass off her results as his own. Even though George initially tells Jerry that he thinks IQ tests are a terrible way to determine someone's intelligence, now that he's going to such lengths to pretend he has a high score, when his girlfriend says she also doesn't believe in them, George now bigs up IQ as the best possible way to measure a person's intelligence. This way he maximizes the results of the risk he's taking. The more she believes in IQ, the more reward I get for having a high IQ. This is a common technique George will use to try to swing his victim's behavior in whatever direction will benefit him. He oversells the outcome to make it seem like the thing he wants is an exciting opportunity that will benefit you. His big-nosed girlfriend thinks she needs a nose job. George tells her the doctors are incredible and most people secretly already have one. His parents are thinking of moving to Florida. He becomes a sales rep for the place, making it sound like a dream location. When Elena asks if the sweater he bought her is cashmere, he reinforces, of course it's cashmere, as if what else would you ever expect from him, despite the fact that he only bought it because it was marked down from $600 to $85 because of the barely noticeable red dot on the front of it. But then when he gets caught in one of his many lies, George never owns up or takes responsibility. Instead, he gaslights the other person into thinking they're the crazy ones for ever suspecting otherwise. This goes deeper than just lying, as it's making the other person feel guilty or wrong for plainly observing the reality in front of them. You think I just knocked over and ran through all the women and children when there was a fire? I was leading the way. You think my parents bitterly stole the rye they brought as a gift for your dinner party because you didn't serve it? No, it was just lost in your house somewhere, waiting to be rediscovered. Let's investigate George's gaslighting techniques.
What happened to the test?
What?
During the IQ scheme, when his girlfriend discovers food and coffee spilled on the test, George pretends that he hopped out the window to go get coffee. And when she naturally questions why he wouldn't just use the door, he turns it around as if she's silly for even asking. Why would he go through the door when the window is right there? So there's nothing suspicious going on here, you're just stupid. When Elaine accuses George of trying to gift her a damaged cashmere sweater and pretending he bought it at full price, here's how he tries to guilt trip her out of it. Elaine, I'm shocked. I'm shocked. Here I go out, in the spirit of the season, and spend all my savings to buy you the most beautiful Christmas sweater I've ever seen, to show my appreciation to you at Christmas. And this is the thanks I get? At Christmas. So we can see he's playing the victim here, emphasizing how much money he spent on the sweater, as well as repeating the words Christmassy spirit of the season over and over, as Christmas is a time of forgiveness and generosity, as if he's trying to make her reciprocate his alleged generosity at Christmas. Another blatant gaslighting attempt is when he bursts into his boss's office, insults him in an angry tirade, and quits. But then realizing he has no other job prospects, tries to go back in on Monday as if nothing even happened. And when his boss sees him and questions what the hell he's doing here, George tries to act like he's surprised he ever took it seriously, as it was clearly always a big joke.
I don't know where you're getting this from. You're serious, aren't you? Oh.
All of these moments prove that reality is not allowed in George's world. He always has to rewrite what actually happened to make himself look better than he really is. He never apologizes. He never simply confesses. He'll always push for the narrative that will not only protect his ego, but potentially elevate his reputation. This feeds into how George manipulates everyone at work. George Costanza has a strange relationship with money. On the one hand, he's so cheap that he'll start a vendetta with anyone who shortchanges him. But on the other hand, it's not like he works hard for his money. In fact, he'll go to great lengths to swindle money out of an organization while doing less than nothing to deserve it. It starts in the unemployment office, when George wants to pretend he was looking for a job to continue being paid by the government to do nothing. So he initially lies, claiming he had a series of interviews for the latex manufacturing firm Vandelay Industries, giving them Jerry's home phone number to confirm. Then when that predictably backfires, he sleazily pretends to find the officer's ugly daughter attractive so that she'll let him take her out to see if they're compatible before she cuts off his payments. When he performs very well in a job interview on the basis that he seems to just get what the boss means instantly, the employer makes it unclear whether he's got the job or not. So unable to ask for any clarification, as that would destroy the only selling point he has, George decides to just show up for work anyway, as the employer is on vacation. That way, either he is hired and was right to be there, or if he wasn't, he can insidiously ingrain himself in the company culture, which makes him harder to get rid of. So to cover all bases, George manipulatively goes out of his way to make himself known around the office, even making an impromptu speech at one of his co-workers' birthday celebrations. When he initially shows up at the office, they question if Jack, whoever that is, wanted him to take the big or small office, and George insists on taking the small one. This is a smart move, because as long as he's technically taking the worse office, no one needs to be questioned, and he can glide inside uninterrupted. Everything George does is somehow simultaneously smart and incredibly stupid, because once he's given the Penske file to work on, of course he does no work all week, as he has no idea what he's even supposed to be doing, creating a ticking time bomb when his boss returns from his trip. So how does he get away with doing so little? Well, as a manipulative narcissist, George has mastered the art of mimicking others, to make himself seem like he's just as competent or admirable as those around him, while secretly contributing nothing of value. This is why he came up with the brilliant strategy of looking angry all day at work to avoid actually having to do anything. Because when people see you looking angry or annoyed, they automatically assume you're stressed from being so busy, so they're not going to add to your workload if you're already swamped. George understands that in any large organization, it's hard to know who actually did what, so the bosses end up looking for superficial signals of who's working hard. For example, when George locks his keys in his car and leaves the vehicle overnight for days, suddenly the bosses tell him they admire how hard he's been working, as between both executives, one thinks he sees George's car there as the first person to arrive in the morning, and the other sees his car still there, so he seems like he's the last one to leave at night. So given he's getting all this credit for doing nothing already, their laziest employee secretly takes off on vacation, as hanging around the office and risking actually doing anything can only hurt his chances of getting promoted. On another occasion, George walks into the bathroom to discover his boss in the middle of delegating work to him for a very important project. Not wanting to appear as if he wasn't listening, without asking, he now has to subtly piece together what he has to do like a detective, looking for tiny clues in what his boss tells him about the project he's pretending to be in the midst of. So again, it's all about appearing competent and busy rather than actually being a hard worker. Somehow, without lifting a finger, his boss tells him that he saw the finished project and was so impressed that he handed it straight up to the big man. So George takes the credit for the project, whatever it is, as he assumes that either the work never needed to be done in the first place, or someone else did it for him behind the scenes. Does he ever feel guilty for stealing credit for work he never did? Of course not. You see, a job is a privilege that George doesn't really believe he deserves. He suffers from an abnormal level of imposter syndrome, which is only emboldened by the reality that he does no work. So in George's mind, no matter what he does, he's always seconds away from being exposed and fired. Just like how he feels in dating, rejection is always right around the corner. So every day of being paid is a blessing, a low-level grift he's forced to play to survive. And he'll take literally any advantage he can in getting his foot in the door. For instance, when an employer assumes he's handicapped, George unashamedly plays into those expectations, as that way he gets the most validation for doing the least work, and he even gets his own private bathroom. This is the perfect scheme for George, as finally he can be physically viewed as the victim he's always perceived himself to be.
How do you live with yourself? It's not easy.
But while George does have the corrupt impulses to puppet master those around him, he doesn't quite have the skill or luck to pull it off. He almost always gets caught or pays the price for his deceptions. As good as his ideas can sound on paper, they just never quite work out the way you'd expect them to. For example, in the episode The Switch, Jerry wants to switch his current girlfriend for her more attractive roommate, but it seems impossible. No one in the history of man has ever pulled off such a thing. So he enlists the help of George, as he's fluent in the dark art of manipulation, and he comes up with what he believes is the perfect plan. Firstly, Jerry will tell his current girlfriend that he wants to have a ménage à trois with her and her roommate. This single course of action will have a two-pronged effect. His girlfriend will be so offended that she'll instantly dump him, and then seek out the roommate to console her. The roommate will of course act sympathetic, but a part of her will feel somewhat flattered by her inclusion. A few days later, Jerry will call the apartment at a time his now ex is at work so he can speak to the roommate. She loves to laugh, so Jerry can easily charm her with his jokes and then suggest a polite invitation to dinner. Although the roommate will presumably have to run it by Jerry's former flame, she will want so little to do with him after his kinky proposal that she'll say, "If you want to waste your time with that pervert, that's your problem." On paper, it sounds genius. He's masterminded how every domino is likely to fall in his favor to eliminate one candidate while opening the door to the other. However, he's failed to consider one possibility, because it would never happen for him. What if both women are actually into the idea? In which case, it is now Jerry that will be forced to back out, as he's not that kind of guy. As always, if it's George's plan, no matter how detailed or intelligent it happens to sound, it will always backfire. If you live by the George, you die by the George. This is why when George tries the new strategy of just doing the opposite of all of his normal instincts, he actually finds success. He admits his most humiliating weaknesses right up front. He doesn't seek approval. He speaks his mind, no matter the status of the person he's talking to. And he actually withholds sex instead of chasing it. Who knew that not seeming desperate and acting self-assured could unlock so many doors? But of course this doesn't last. George's misanthropic instincts are too hardwired to ever change. Remember, this is a man who will try to falsely claim a death in the family discount for cheaper flights, who will pretend his own father died so he can justify selling his clothes to a second-hand store, who will join a book club just to impress a girl and not only not read the book, but try to cheat by watching the movie version of the story at a stranger's house, who will try to take his own tip out of the tip jar if the employee didn't see him put it in. The same man who will drive a recovering alcoholic back to the bottle for not apologizing to him during his 10-step program, who will try to drug the boss that fired him because he didn't let him gaslight his way back in, who gets so jealous that his friends saw his date swimming naked before he did that he'll try to walk in on an innocent woman changing as revenge. And when that backfires, and instead it is his shrunken private parts that are seen and whispered about, he will purposely slip lobster into his would-be victim's eggs as revenge, knowing that she's kosher and it goes against her religious beliefs. Because in George's mind, every infraction, no matter how petty, demands retaliation. You don't get to win because you already won by just being born you instead of him. So George Costanza is the real villain of Seinfeld. He's a compulsive liar, a calloused manipulator, an insecure narcissist. A man-child with no real values or code, which allows him to easily limbo under the incredibly low bar he's previously set for himself with each passing episode. He doesn't view other people as fellow human beings, but as pawns he can use in pursuit of sexual reward, social acceptance, or financial compensation, clinging onto his hosts for dear life like the parasite that he is. We can only be grateful that he's so wrapped up in his own neuroses and so pathetically transparent in his deceptions that a sick mind like this could never rise to power. Well, if you've made it this far, firstly, thank you for watching. But if you could now give the video a like, possibly even leave a comment and click on that subscribe button, it will encourage that mysterious algorithm to do its thing.